Well, we are back from LA and back in the podcast studio here at the Intermountain Health Performance Center. Eddie Paskal with my guy, Jesse Merrick. And after a long time away, Jesse, we are back with another episode of the Raiders Training Camp podcast presented by SiriusXM. How are you, good sir?
I'm good. It feels like it's been a month since we've been in the studio doing this thing.
Dude, it's been so long. And like, a big shout out to our guy, Kirk Morrison, for helping us out when we were in LA while Jesse held down his real job here in the desert.
Gotta pay the bills.
But it is so funny, though. Like, we talk about kind of the grind of camp, the routine of camp, that you and I haven't done this in like a week and a half, and it literally feels like a lifetime.
It does. It's crazy. It's wild how fast the time can move to where it just does feel like it's been like, all right, let's figure this out again. Hopefully we'll still be in mid-season form again, or mid-camp form, I guess.
Yes, mid-camp form is a good form, and I will take any type of form that we can get. But since the last time we hung out, there's been a lot that's going on, and you and I will talk about what we've seen on the practice field the past 2 days, a different version of camp, it feels like, for the Silver and Black. But let's begin here, right? The guy is the talk of the town. He's the Prince of Las Vegas. Jimmy G's the king, but Aiden O'Connell sure as heck seems to be the prince. Two really, really solid outings now for the rookie from Purdue. I mean, just what have you kind of thought about his kind of burst onto the preseason scene here?
Yeah, look, I've been very impressed with everything that Aiden O'Connell's done. And obviously the caveat of the
Put
guys
it in
that he's
big,
going
bold
against.
letters.
Exactly. Look, let's all not overreact. But having said that, really impressed with what he's done. And when you really look at it, of all the other quarterbacks that have been drafted, he's outplayed all of them. The guys have been drafted much higher, too. So in this year's draft and previous drafts as well. So really impressed with the way that he just kind of processed, moved from read to read, his confidence, his decision-making. There's very little to nitpick, obviously, from our viewpoint of not knowing all the details of what's being called and things like that. But the way that he's moved from read to read and been able to kind of ad-lib, too, when the play doesn't necessarily develop the way you would want it to him and his receiver to be on the right page, like the Wilkerson one, for instance. I think Wilkerson was running a goal line fade. Looked like they both adapted on the fly, and he turned into kind of like a bit of a mini post. Boom, touchdown right back in there. So, like, that was something to me that was high level for him to be able to hang in there, him and Wilkerson to be on the same page for that. And you see the tight window throws. The one to Keelan Cole where he kind of like just fitted in there, threaded the needle. There's three guys in that area. You got to put it in the perfect spot, and he wasn't afraid to do that. So really impressed with anything and everything I've seen from Aiden thus far. Again, the caveat of who he's doing it against, but this kid has come in as a rook and outplayed the other rookies. I'll say that for sure.
And look, as we sit here and record on August 23rd, I never want to be downer Eddie, right? Like, this is the time of the year to be excited, to feel optimistic, to be fired up about everything that the Silver and Black is doing, right? And Aiden O'Connell, to your point, has very much looked the part. I think for me, what's really impressed me the most is now through 2 games, both at home at Allegiant and now on the road as well in Los Angeles, we have seen a poise, we have seen a confidence, we have seen, is unflappability a word? I think it is.
Yeah.
It's pretty close.
If not, we'll make it one.
Yeah, we're calling it. Thank you, Merriam-Webster. But I think just kind of a maturity beyond his years, and a dude who, like, to your point, doesn't really seem to be, and I mean this in the best possible way, like overly impressed by the moment.
No.
Like a dude who's like, this is kind of what I do. I go out there, I play quarterback. I was doing it in college last year. Now I do it in the NFL. And is there certainly room for him to get better, things to improve at? Absolutely, 100 million%. But as we sit here at the tail end of August, for a dude that was drafted where he was for the Raiders, you got to feel really, really good, really confident at the progress that he's made thus far.
Yeah, you definitely have. I mean, there's nothing that leads you to believe or to worry about him or be like, oh, this kid doesn't know what he's doing. It's very clear that he's been in his playbook, that he feels comfortable in this offense, and he's learning day by day, continuing to get better. I mean, he obviously improved from the first preseason game to the second. We'll see what he does here in this third one against the Cowboys. But I just pulled up his draft profile.
Oh, let's do it.
I want to read to you guys. I love doing this. But like, let's just purely look at his strengths on here and tell me if this is what you've seen in the preseason thus far. Experience playing under center in a pro-style system. Looks like a guy that's done that. Stands tall in the pocket and delivers over the top. Definitely has done that. Play-action throws feature good timing to the route. Again, does that. Anticipatory passing makes up for a lack of velocity. He has been great in terms of anticipating throwing guys open.
The Trey Tucker put the ball where only Trey Tucker could go get it.
Threw it 5 yards before he even got to his break. That was great on that front. And also good accuracy and placement throwing between the hashes. We've seen that as well. The Keelan Cole pass to him right over the middle is one that comes to mind on that, as my computer jumps on me here. But completion totals hurt by a high number of drops by receivers. Well, not to call anyone out when we've seen that.
But that's just reality, right?
Exactly.
We look at that at the preseason opener against in Allegiant.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy had 3 incomplete passes, and we can be honest, 2 of them were drops.
Exactly.
So I think if he gets those 2 drops, he's 17 for 18?
Which is wild as a kid coming in the 4th round. Last 2 here, willing to check it down and move on to the next play. Check, no pun intended on that one too. Makes attempts to get the ball out instead of taking a sack. Definitely has done that. We don't see this kid sitting there and waste time in the pocket. He's trying to make a play and continue and keep this thing alive. So I think you look at the strengths and what Aiden Hill was supposed to be coming out of college, and that's exactly what we've seen, which is a huge win to be able to find a guy like that in the 4th round. 1,000,000,000
gazillion% yes. Yeah. Now, I think that, look, I don't even say I think, right? Jimmy's going to be the guy week 1. Jimmy's going to be the guy week 2, week 3, whatever, right? But we see every single year, and we were talking about it with some of our friends in the media earlier today, just the weirdness of the NFL and the depth that you have to have at every single position.
Yeah.
A very wise man once told me, he goes, the backup quarterback is the most important position that you on the team that you don't think about. He's like, you don't really need a good one until you really need a good one. Mm-hmm. And so, look, I'm not here to sit and debate who's going to be the number 2 when that first depth chart comes out, whether it's Hoyer, whether it's Aiden, whether it's whoever it is, right? And with the new kind of 3 quarterback thing that the NFL is doing this year, which I'm a huge fan of, but all the same, like, we're not going to sit here and say, hey, who's going to be the backup? But you have to feel good now, if you're a fan of the Raiders, in the instance that, hey, something happens to Jimmy, something happens to Hoyer, that you have a dude who was in college 9 months ago that is able to keep the ship afloat. And for a backup quarterback, whoever it is, that's really the big ask, is keep the ship afloat.
Yeah, it's massive. That's all that you ask for in that situation, because if it does, it's kind of that, like, hey, break glass in case of emergency type of deal. And this kid has shown that at the very least, he does, like, he takes what the defense gives you and does what is asked of him. And that's all you can ask for in a second or a third string quarterback, however the heck it shakes out at that point. And I think, too, look, God forbid if something does happen to Jimmy, that's not a great situation for this team. I would imagine, and this is no knock on Hoyer, but Coach McDaniels talked about it today. You kind of weigh the pros and cons of looking to the future or not, and he noted that they had Matt Flynn, and I'm blanking on who the other quarterback was at the time.
I think it was Matt Castle, right?
Yeah,
it was Matt Castle and Doug Flutie.
Yeah, and there you go. And they went with Matt Castle, in the sense that he was a younger guy, wanted to see what he could do for the future. And I think, again, fingers crossed this never happens. The Raiders don't have to figure this out. But I think if that were the case, depending on where they are in the season, what the record looks like, they throw the kid out there, see what he's got. And I would be, if I'm a fan of this team, based off of what I've seen in training camp thus far, I would be very confident in what he can go and do.
And you hit the nail on the head where I think so much of it depends on the situation of the season, right? Like the week 3 scenario is probably a lot different than the week 15, week 16 scenario. But all the same, let's keep our fingers crossed that we don't even have to have a legitimate conversation about that.
And just one more point too, Devin, we're talking about with him, like, everyone has seen this on TV, in person, at the preseason games. This is also the same guy we've seen in practice as well.
Yeah.
Like, he has looked every bit the part of what you've seen in the game in practice, has led good 2-minute drives, has been decisive in and out of it. Very rarely do you see him make a mistake. Today, he was taking a lap. I didn't see what he did to have to run that lap, but I was trying to think about it today. I don't remember him running another lap prior to that. Maybe one more throughout camp.
Yeah, maybe. But I was just trying to think about that too. And you said I can't think of one where he had to do that either.
Exactly. So as a rook, digesting this playbook specifically, this offense, which is very hard to learn, a lot of people talk about it all the time and has a lot of verbiage, for him to really only make a couple of mistakes, and I know there's obviously more to it than we have seen and noticed, but for him to only do these glaring things or have a penalty or a drop ball out of center or whatever it was to have to run, to not see a lot of those, that's a huge sign of what this kid can do.
And you expect those from every rookie.
Exactly.
Right? I don't care if you're the number 1 overall pick or you're Mr. Irrelevant or somewhere in between. You expect mental errors from every single rookie in the NFL. Speaking of rookies, though, one of Aiden O'Connell's rookie classmates, on the defensive side of the ball, a man who Raider Nation has been very, very excited to see in any type of capacity, Tyree Wilson gets back on the practice field when we're in Los Angeles. Obviously, doesn't play on Saturday, right? Saturday in LA, but now he's back on the practice field today. It remains to be seen whether he and Jimmy and the rest of the big dogs in the silver and black play in the preseason finale this upcoming Saturday in Dallas.
Yeah.
But all the same, good news to see the big man out there.
Heck yeah, he looks the part.
Dude.
If that counts for something, he does. I mean, he looks like the Greek freak out there walking around in pads. So just the frame alone, you can see, what the staff liked in having him and a guy like him. And once his game catches up to that and his comfortability, he could be scary. He has all the tools that you look for in an edge rusher like that. So I've been just impressed. Again, haven't been able to, we were talking about this before we get going. Things are a little further away from us now, that they're back here. It does have a bit more of like a regular season practice feel to it. So there's only so much we can see, but we got a good view of one-on-ones and kind of offensive line versus defensive line when they're working stunts and things like that. The quickness is definitely there. I think the strength aspect in his game is probably still catching up a bit. I saw him and Thayer going against each other. Thayer kind of stood him up a bit, and Thayer's a massive human being
dude,
too.
Man.
And that's a matchup that I think will be fun to watch, for as much as we're able to see, over the years here between those two at practice, because the frame is very similar between those two. So I've liked what I've seen out of Tyree thus far. He's one of those dudes, you put him up first walking off the bus because he looks the part like we noted. And again, when he gets comfortable in doing what's asked of him, this kid could be a monster.
Yeah, I think you were very accurate in the sense of kind of just like lifting the veil a little bit, right? Where we're back here in Henderson, back here at practice. And yes, we still have open practice. It's the full 2-hour session.
Yeah.
But it feels, and this could just be kind of my interpretation and your interpretation, it does feel very much as though we're shifting into a regular season mode, which makes a ton of sense because we are opening the season here sooner than later, which is fantastic. But it feels like kind of gone are the days of the 90-man just really going at it and really, I don't want to say there's a lack of intensity because I don't think that's it, but I think it's a shift in kind of focus, a shift in overall goals for the day.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's part of the business. That's part of the calendar. But it just kind of different, or it's kind of our line in the sand that, okay, we are getting closer to real football.
Yeah, I mean, what is this, 4 weeks into camp, 3 and a half?
Practice 17, I think.
So at this point, that's what it should feel like. And as you were talking, I was kind of thinking over it in my head, and I'm like, there's not many, in terms of who's starting and who's not. Those battles seem to have kind of been decided for the most part, outside of a couple here and there. There's just not a lot of question marks on the top half of it. Again, the big thing is just going to be who makes this team. And that's where I think it does kind of feel like it shifts a bit more to, obviously, we're looking ahead to Tuesday, but it just feels like this team is a little more settled, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and speaking of roster reduction day, this upcoming Tuesday, 1 o'clock p.m. 1 o'clock p.m. West Coast time, 4 o'clock on the East, but I love to operate on West Coast time exclusively.
It's much
Jesse
better.
Merrick, yes. And we talk about kind of this preseason finale that'll happen here in just a few days in Dallas. And the third game is always a very interesting one because historically speaking, right, and we haven't heard in totality from Coach McDaniels. He said him and Dave Ziegler, we're going to kind of figure out who's playing, who's not playing literally this afternoon. So they're off their practice field, so that meeting might be happening right now. But, historically speaking, you don't see a lot of the big dogs go out there and do their thing. Yes, they'll go through warm-ups, break a sweat, and then lock it down.
Yeah.
But to your point, I'm very excited to see some of these kind of bottom-of-the-roster battles shake out. Because this is it. This is your last opportunity. And people every single year, whether you're on the Raiders or any of the 31 other teams, guys are going to make teams based off of what we see on Saturday night. So just give me one guy or two guys that you're excited to see kind of do their thing against the Cowboys.
Yeah, look, and I think he's a guy that's safe, but Nesta Jade Silvera, a guy that's been really interesting to watch throughout camp. If he continues to do what we've seen him do in practice, and does that in the game, definitely going to be fun to watch. Another guy, too, Neil Farrell Jr., to me, look, it's a very crowded room among the D tackles. Let me just, obviously throwing out Jerry Tillery and Bilal Nichols. Let's go with John Jenkins, Adam Butler, Matthew Butler, Byron Young, Neil Farrell Jr., and Nesta Jade Silvera. That's a lot of guys.
Yeah.
So again, some really good players aren't going to make the active roster. To me, Neil Farrell, anytime I've watched him in any of these games, he has been a massive space eater. He has taken that big jump from year 1 to year 2. I think that I think he would add something to this group that you don't see a ton of. But then also at the same veil, John Jenkins has played well. The vet, he's looked every bit the part of that. So you just wonder how all that kind of shakes out. Matthew Butler, a guy I think hasn't popped a ton to me from what I've seen when I've watched him out there, but also I'm sure this is a very big game for him. He's another younger guy. What's that kind of look like for him? Adam Butler too. Jordan Willis has had a nice camp, a nice training camp thus far. Adam Plant, the local kid. I mean, this is going to be really big for him. I also too wonder how much gamesmanship there is from how many snaps do you give some of these guys maybe that are towards the end of the roster for other teams not to get a look at them.
Yeah, you bring up a great point,
Yeah.
because let's not forget that the Raiders will make their roster reductions like everyone else in the league on Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, they're going to start putting together their practice squad. And we now
Yeah.
have an expanded practice squad as opposed to a few years ago. And we see it every single year. You need to have good depth on the practice squad because those guys, it is a guarantee. A handful of them are going to come up and they're going to produce for your team.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. And then, just continue to look throughout some of this. Like David Long Jr. and Duke Shelley, Amik Robertson. These are guys that are good players that I think should make this team, but you wonder where they fit into the mix here in this one. good players aren't going to make the team. So, like, a guy that a lot of us maybe think should make it won't, and you don't know what happens. Sam Webb is another guy, has played some big minutes for this team over the last year or so here. So, those are the guys specifically on the defensive side of the ball that I'm going to be watching to see how that kind of lines up. And then also, too, we talk about it all the time, just in terms of the wide receiver group. How many do they keep? Do any of them make a case for, like, hey, you absolutely have to keep me? But depending on what those numbers look like, to me, it really just does seem like it's DeAndre Carter and then Philip Dorsett and kind of everybody else at that point.
Yeah, and I think just sticking on the defensive side of the football for a sec, since you named every position except the linebackers, which is great because those are the guys that are saying, hey, I'm going to keep an eye on those guys.
Yeah.
The Amari Bernies of the world, the Drake Thomases of the world, who had an incredible game on Sunday in Los Angeles and says, hey, don't forget about me. I'm still here. And what gets a little interesting there, too, is that Darian Butler, unfortunately, his season's over, goes on season-ending IR. So now all of a sudden there's a shift in kind of how you're building out that room.
Big time.
Who's going to take advantage of that opportunity, right? Is it a Drake Thomas? Does Drake Thomas finish up a preseason with another team-leading tackling effort, right? What does Amari Burney, a guy that you and I are both very fond of what he does on the football field, where does he figure into this? So I think the linebackers, to me, are going to be very interesting. Luke Masterson again, right? Like a guy that was been here, done that a year ago, but still you have to figure has to prove to this coaching staff, hey, I'm deserving of being here in 2023. So, I mean, I highly doubt we're going to see the big dogs out there, but there's certainly no shortage of intrigue of things to watch, specifically on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I had to leave one group for you.
Thank you.
But having said that, Drake Thomas was one guy that as I was going through here, he popped just because of what he did in that last game. Like you said, he was a heat-seeking missile. And then you do wonder about Amari Burney. I think those are the two in terms of the linebackers that intrigue me the most, because I think Curtis Bolton has done enough to kind of show, hey, special teams-wise, what I can provide to this team, and also as a depth piece, I deserve to be here. Amari Burney, I do think is safe. I think Drake Thomas might end up being the odd man out, maybe a practice squad guy, who knows. But the minutes that I think we're going to see out of Amari Burney, Drake Thomas, and Luke Masterson, that's going to be exciting to watch, to see what they do in this final quote-unquote game time opportunity.
And I think what's great, too, about the third preseason game is that you see guys that are very self-aware of what this game means for them, right? Because there's going to be, whether it's the Raiders or any other team, like there's going to be dudes who strap it up on whatever day, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, whenever they play. And that's the last time they're going to play professional football.
Yeah.
And there's a knowledge that, hey, if today doesn't go my way, like this could be a wrap. Yeah. And so I think you see a lot of guys really, putting their best foot forward, really being committed and diligent to what they need to do, because they say, hey, like the NFL, not for long. And for a lot of these guys, unfortunately, the adventure is going to end on Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, somebody's got to play in these games, like obviously, but I think the people that you see playing high minutes, high snap numbers, those are the ones where you wonder, like, okay, like what's their standing like on this depth chart? Have they not shown enough throughout these practices to give these coaching staff a firm choice on, like, okay, this guy is or is not making this team? So yeah, that's one of the things that's going to be interesting, just to see who plays, how long, what situations they're put in, all those different things. And it is exciting because I think, maybe for the average fan, they're like, oh, I don't know who any of these guys are. But if you watch, like, I'd imagine the competitiveness factor does go up so much, to your point in this one, because like you said, these guys are fighting for their lives in the NFL, to be able to feed their families, to be able to start their career. Who knows what happens for them after this?
Yeah, and on a much, I don't want to say like a lighter note, but now the Raiders own the longest preseason win streak in the NFL, right? So you got to keep that going. You got to make sure that we go from 6 to 7 wins for the Silver and Black. And Jesse, I don't know how much of this we're going to get clarity to this Saturday against the Cowboys, but I'm still keeping my eye on that right tackle battle, man. I really am. The Thayer Mumford, Jermaine Illuminor, kind of mano-a-mano, it feels like at this point. We saw Jermaine last week on the left side, which I think is a great opportunity for him too, right? Because you need, now without Brandon Parker, you need a true swing tackle. Mm-hmm. So you need to have a guy that, God forbid something happens to Colton for a half, that you can throw on the left side and feel good. If that's the case, you feel good about having Jermaine on the left side, protecting Jimmy G's blind side. But all the same, I don't know how much we're going to see of that first-team offensive line, but still a battle that I am very, very intrigued in as we get closer and closer to roster reduction day.
I think that's the one that stands out to most to me that maybe is still undecided. I sent out a tweet the other day. I think Jermaine locks down the starting spot on the right side, and the fact that he was out there with Jimmy on that drive. Obviously, we know Colton didn't play, but to have the confidence in him to put him there at left tackle when there were other guys available, to put him out there for that first drive, I think just shows like how this coaching staff feels about Jermaine and what he can do. And I know he's the primary swing tackle, so it probably makes more sense to put him out there. But to do that with your franchise quarterback, to have him in that position, to me, I think that leans that he's got the bit of the edge. And I just think, too, I've seen him kind of turn it on a bit more. The last 2 days when I've been watching one-on-ones with the offensive and defensive lines, I've seen Jermaine stone guys a bit more and stand them up and things like that. Not that Thayer hasn't. I noted against Tyree, Thayer did it as well today. But I just think that he has the edge, and I think it's his job to lose. So I think Thayer would have to be up and over the top of what it would expect to be. But having said that, no matter how the heck this thing works out, the Raiders seemingly have 2 good right tackles.
1,000%. And I think that whether Thayer is the starter, air quotes, or kind of comes in that jumbo package, we're still going to see Thayer Mumford on the football field this year. We saw it a bunch of years ago. We get the Thayer package, right? And I think we'll see something similar in 2023. And, we talk about it all the time, and it's just the sad reality of the NFL is you need to be really, really deep at every position, but offensive line in particular, right? Those guys put their bodies through a beating, and you just it's hard. We've been so spoiled with Colton Miller. I know he missed a few games last year, but we've been so spoiled. Like Colton is the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
In terms of just saying, hey, he's out there every single Sunday. Don't worry, he's good to go. And so you need to feel good about your depth. And for the Raiders, it's a good position to be in. And compared to where we were a year ago, when you and I were having these conversations, getting closer to roster reduction day, night and day for the big boys up front.
Well, and that's the thing too. You talk about depth. I mean, and we talked about this a couple times on the pod. Like the depth that the Raiders all of a sudden have along their offensive line is great. And obviously, we'll see what the roster looks like in terms of who they keep and don't moving forward. But Muti, he got a lot of snaps in the last game. With Parham out there and played well. Was out there with the starters. And, watching him run block, I was really impressed with what I saw at him. I hadn't really paid a ton of attention to him throughout camp, if I'm being honest here, until that game. And I left thinking like, wow, okay, this guy looks like a solid depth piece for this team. Again, with Jermaine, his versatility, he's kind of that chess piece where if and when something does happen, you can slide him around and then boom, Thayer or however it works out is the next guy there. Greg Van Roten's looked good. You got Alex Bars as well. I mean, guys behind the starters that I think you can put out there, and it's not like you know what,
And we talk about that versatility. We didn't even bring up Dylan Parham and everything that he can do along the offensive line. A true kind of Swiss Army knife of roles he can play, things he can do. Obviously, has experience playing center, either of those interior line positions. And hey, I feel like if they threw him at right tackle for a series, he'd probably hold up.
He'd be able to figure it out. He did in college for a bit too. He played tackle some snaps. So
So we talk about that versatility. We talk about that depth. We talk about kind of that puzzle that you really do have to kind of figure out week to week to week once guys get a little banged up. And the Raiders, especially on the offensive front, in a much better position than they were 12 months ago.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing too, just as we continue to just talk about this and like the final game, like you mentioned guys fighting for their NFL lives, like these undrafted free agents, the Adam Plants of the world, this is your opportunity to show this team like, hey, I belong on your practice squad at the very least, that you got to bring me back so that I don't go somewhere else, so that I can continue to develop and turn into something for you a year, 2 years from now, whatever it is. And that's where I think it does make it fun to watch. But yeah, just overall, offensive line's been an interesting one to watch, which I think is not something you can always say about the NFL to a lot of fans, and this has been a fun one to watch this battle develop.
Yeah, and I think it's been fun for fans because, like I said, you're talking about really, really good football players that are now kind of battling it out, as opposed to, and I don't mean this in like a negative way, when in past years perhaps the depth wasn't there, so you're like, all right, it might not be the most talented group, who's going to be the one that rises up? Where this year you go, man, the cupboard is stacked.
Yeah.
There are so many good football players. How is this one going to kind of play out at the end? And like I said, it's going to be really exciting. It's an important game for so many of these dudes as we get ready for roster reduction day on Tuesday.
And I think the big thing on that, too, is like this staff tells you that they want to build a long-term winner. In order to do that, you have to have quality depth. And it's very clear to see, to your point, that there is depth that's different from this year's team to previous year's teams. And that's the thing where you just look at it and there's very clearly steps moving forward to make this a winner for the long haul. And that's something that fans, I think, need to hold on to and realize that just the depth offensively, defensively, you look at every position and it is already much better than it was in last year, the year before, all that stuff. So, like, that's something there, I think, where again, when injuries do happen, it's not this like, oh my God, what are we going to do when so-and-so goes down? There's another guy that can fill in there that's a good quality player. And a lot of guys, too, waiting in the wings that have some years of experience, some vets, and that's invaluable.
Yeah, and credit to Dave Ziegler and his staff and Josh McDaniels and the staff for building out that depth, right? We talk about in the NFL all the time where depth and competition is not something that is born overnight.
No.
Right? You got 90 guys on a roster. You're not making 90 transactions in an offseason. I'm sure as some general managers would like to. But all the same, like you hit the nail on the head. A lot of competition, a lot of versatility, a lot of things to watch this upcoming Saturday night when the Raiders wrap up the preseason. Well, Jesse, before you and I get out of here, and I think we have one or two more shows of these.
I think one or two more.
One or
I
two.
can't remember.
We have to go look at the calendar. Yeah. You're not done with us yet.
Not
You're not done with us just yet. But on our way out, 30 seconds of plugs. Where can the people find you?
Yeah, man. Again, always on News 3. We're going to be diving into some Raiders stuff, obviously, the next couple days here. High school football season has started, so shout out to the kiddos. Obviously, every Thursday night, I'm out at a high school football game covering that one. It's always fun to kind of see that. You see the dream beginning at the beginning level of that. So make sure you guys are tuning in for all of that and more. And then obviously as the season continues to move along here, more and more Raiders, and that makes me happy because I love talking ball.
Yes, and we love having you here, and we have a lot to discuss still after the Raiders wrap up the preseason this Saturday night against the Dallas Cowboys. So for Eddie Paskal, my guy Jesse Merrick, and everyone else at Silver and Black Productions, thank you for hanging out with us. Enjoy the game this upcoming Saturday, and you're stuck with us. We're going to be back next week for another episode of the Raiders Training Camp Podcast.